All right, good morning to you. It's Friday morning, and man, that's a good day for me. That means I can do some ministry stuff, do some writing, hang out with the Tamster, all the things that I really love to do. So, very excited about the day and looking forward to everything in it. Hope your day is going to go well. Man, last night, the Tamster and I made our way to a little town just north of us, Springville, Alabama. And a quaint little town. We've been going there since we were young marrieds, and it's got a cool little main street that used to be a thriving kind of a antique and crafty sort of place, and then kind of fell away, and now it's kind of coming back together. And one of our favorite coffee shops is up there, Nichols Nook, and they're open late on Thursdays. And so we made our way up there, got a little early before they open, and made our way to the little outdoor seating area that serves, several little restaurants, the Main Street Pizza, and then the little Mexican restaurant that's there. So we just got something to drink and sat down, and they were doing karaoke, so we just enjoyed watching that. We don't normally participate in that stuff, but it was fun to watch, and so we did that, and then made our way to Nichols Nook, and had some great coffee, and had a blueberry scone. Tammy had some sort of muffin, met some friends there, chatted with them for a bit, made our way back home. But it was a great night. Man, you just need to get out and kind of, you don't have to spend a lot of money just to get out and kind of see what's going on around your neck of the woods, so to speak, and just find some things to do and enjoy, and the conversation flows in those kind of environments. And so we had an absolutely great night. And so who knows what we're going to get into today after the Tamster gets back with her coffee girl time, and I get finished doing my writing and some other things that we're doing. But enough of that. Today we are in Acts chapter 29. Well, not really, because there's no Acts 29, but if there was, this would be it. And so I took some time over the past, weeks in anticipation of this, just kind of drifting back into the old books of church history and reading some of the letters. There are other letters and documentation about what took place outside of the scriptures. And so you've got a man named Clement, Polycarp. There's several. They were contemporaries of these guys. They weren't apostles, but they also kind of wrote letters as they became bishops, which when I say became a bishop, that's how the Catholic Church terms them, but they had overseers in all of these certain areas, and so that's what these men were. And so you dig through that, and you try and piece some things together. You look at the letters that were written from when Paul wrote, and you can somewhat loosely piece together the end of his life. So that's what we've done, and that's what we're going to do today. And so let me just kind of remind you where we are. Paul is in Rome. He had appealed to Caesar because he couldn't get any relief from where he was in Jerusalem, and then Caesarea. They sent him there, and he had a trial in Caesarea. And then finally, when he realizes, man, these guys they're not taking this thing serious, he's going, hey, I appeal to Rome, which is a Roman citizen's right. Kind of like, hey, I appeal to the Supreme Court. So he's taken to Rome and put under house arrest, given lots of freedom. This is about 61 AD, just to put things in perspective for you. And when we say that, there's a variance of about a year or two. It's hard to distinguish everything. Like even the death of Jesus, some would say was 31 AD. Some would say it's 33. And each one has their different ways of working through that. But at any rate, this is most likely 61 AD. Now, Nero is Caesar. He's a young man. He's 25. He has been tutored by a man named Seneca. I tell you this for a point that we're going to look at in a minute. His brother was Gallio. Gallio was the one who dismissed Paul's case in Acts chapter 18 when he got arrested in Corinth. And Gallio dismissed him. Odds are that Gallio and Seneca obviously talk, and since Seneca is Nero's tutor, so to speak, from a political operative kind of a way, I'm sure that he gave Nero some counsel, and Nero's mind apparently was not as deviant as or had gotten to that place that it was. He was a little more milder then. Most likely let him go. So that's what we assume. But he was there for 2 years. You remember that's how we left Acts 28. Paul had freedom, left there 2 years. And so Paul writes during that imprisonment, which is house arrest. Not a big deal. He does have chains on him, but he's under house arrest. It's kind of a mild imprisonment, so to speak. He writes to the church at Philippi. So he writes Philippians. He writes Colossians. He writes Philemon. Now Philemon's an interesting letter. It's to a leader in the Colossian church. Philemon, the house meets in his church, and there's a man named Onesimus who was a runaway slave. He left. Somehow he runs into Paul by God's providence. Paul leads him to the Lord. And then Paul writes Philemon a letter and tells Onesimus to take it to him. And in that letter, he's just saying, hey, he's strong-arming Philemon. Hey, Philemon, look, man, I know your slave ran away. I know, the deal is that is kind of like death and all those things. But I'm just telling you that this man's a different man, and I want you to treat him kindly. I'd like you to give him his freedom. Just remember, Philemon, I've done a lot for you, right? So he's strong-arming him, and obviously that's what happened. So now, as we read these letters, we know that when he writes to the Philippians, he's well aware that he could die. He doesn't anticipate it. Now, he is going to be released. But this is writing while he's in that 2-year stint. He says in Philippians chapter 1, verse 19, he says, because I know this will lead to my salvation through your prayers and help from the Spirit of Jesus Christ. My eager expectation is hope, and hope is that I will not be ashamed about anything, but that not now, as always, with all courage, Christ will be highly honored in my body, whether by life or death. Look, man, it could end in death. I don't expect it, but here's what's going on. And so he writes to let them know that. He also says in that same passage, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. Now, if I live on in this flesh, that means fruitful work for me. Hey, if I'm living, I'm still doing fruitful work. I'm not just sitting around. And we know that. He wrote all these letters. And I don't know which one I should choose. I'm torn between the two. Like he has a say in it, I guess, is what he's thinking. I long to depart and be with Christ, which is far better, but to remain in the flesh is more necessary for your sake. Since I am persuaded of this, I know that I will remain and continue with all of you for your progress in joining the faith. He goes, look, man, I realize it's a life or death thing, and I'm good. I just soon go see the Lord. I mean, they can kill me today, and I'll be good. But he says, I think it's just beneficial for you guys that I stay around a little longer. I know the troubles you guys in. I want to give some advice and some help in that manner. So I'm assuming I'm going to be there so that because of my coming to you again, your boasting in Christ may abound. And so, this is what we learned from Paul in that deal. We also know he writes a little later in that same book, Philippians 2:24. He says, I am confident in the Lord that I myself will come to you soon. So this is what we know of Paul when he does it. So he writes to Philemon, and he says a similar thing there in Philemon 22. He tells Philemon, hey, I'm sending this letter with Onesimus, but meanwhile, also prepare a guest room for me, since I hope that through your prayers I'm going to be restored to you too. So as he writes to the city of Colossae, and then he writes to Philemon, the leader, he says, hey, listen, get a room ready. I'm coming. So Paul at this point to the Philippians and the Colossians says, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be released. So in 63 AD, we're going to go with this timeline. Again, it could be a little here or there. In 63 AD, he's released. Now, at this point, things get really kind of difficult to piece together. We're going to find most of our information from his writings after he's put in jail the second time, and that will end up in his death. But just so you kind of are clear. And then we also have other writings. Clement also wrote during this time, and so he wrote a letter and explaining certain things, and he makes some comments about Paul in there going to Spain. So we're like, okay, Paul apparently went here, and he also went to Spain, which was his dream. So it's kind of exciting, right, to know that he did, or that at least that's our understanding based on that that letter. So Paul's released, most likely because of the urgency. He heads east. That is, that he's going to go. This will be what we call Paul's fourth missionary journey. So he heads to Macedonia. We know he made there. That's where Philippi is. So he gets to Greece. And he slides into Philippi, checks on them. We know he goes to Asia Minor and sees the Colossians and Ephesus. And so he gets in those areas. And then he establishes a church in Crete where he leaves Titus. We know that because that's what he says when he writes to Titus. Titus, the reason why I left you in Crete was that you may set in order what remains and appoint elders in every church. So Paul, after he's been released, man, he's getting after it, and so he's doing another journey. He's got a lot of companions, and we'll look at that. So after he does that, that's when it seems like, based on Clement's writings, now Clement was a contemporary of the Apostle Paul. I don't know if I told you all this or not. It all runs together in my head of what we've talked about. He wrote in about 90 A.D., so he wrote about 30 years after this, but he knew Paul and he knew the apostles, and so he says that Paul made it to Spain, and so we assume that he went to Spain, did some work there, of which we know very little at all. And then he traveled east again. Now, it's a quick little time frame because he's going to be arrested again sometime around 65, 66. So he's got about a 2-year stint that he's going to be doing these things. So then he goes east again. He has a run-in, according to 2 Timothy chapter 4, he has a run-in with Alexander the coppersmith. That I jokingly say that's one of my favorite prayers, because he says this. He said, Alexander the coppersmith has done me much harm. May the Lord repay him in kind. And so I tell people, I say, hey, listen, I'm going to pray the same prayer Paul prayed. Sometimes if you annoy me and you get mad at me, I'm going to say, hey, Lord, they're doing me much harm. Repay them in kind, right? I don't really do that. I may have done that seriously on occasion, but that's a whole other story. But anyway, so Paul has this run-in with Alexander the coppersmith. He leaves Timothy at Ephesus. So Timothy apparently had hooked up with him at some point and is on his travels. So he drops him off at Ephesus. This is after his release the first time. Then he says that he plans to winter in Nicopolis, which is in the western Greece area. So he's working his way, and he's trying to, you can't travel much up that area in the bitter cold, and so he's just plotting out his journeys of what he's trying to get done. But he tells Titus that that's what he plans to do. So we look at 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus. Now, 1 and 2 Timothy were written probably a year apart, maybe a little more. So he wrote 1 Timothy pretty early on in his release. I mean, in that prison, in the release. And then as soon as he gets arrested the second time, and then the other one's later in that deal. But this is where we find ourselves. So he drops Trophimus off at Miletus, another one of his workers. So we know that because he tells Timothy that I left Trophimus sick in Miletus. So he's explaining to him he's in jail again, but as he's in jail, he's writing these letters. So is that clear to you? So he wrote in his first letter, in his first prison, Philippians, Colossians, Philemon, and Ephesians. And then in his second imprisonment, he's writing these prison epistles or pastoral epistles, 1st, 2 Timothy, and Titus. So he's traveling, and we know based on those letters what happened in the betweens of the jail, just so that makes sense to you. So he drops Trophimus off at Miletus. He sends Tychicus to Ephesus. That's what he tells us in 2 Timothy. And then he leaves Erastus at Corinth. So he's dropping all of these guys off just to help in the ministry there. I'm sure he spent a lot of time with them under house arrest, discipling them, training them. These are probably now his power men that he's dropping off and leaving just to assist the church, because they know his heart more than some of the others potentially would. So during all of this, Nero has gotten crazy. Now, what brought that about, we don't know, but he's maybe 30. He's gotten crazy. Rome catches on fire. History has a debate whether he started the fires or not. We know at least he kept them burning. But that was a pure political move, no different than what happens in politics today. Evasive maneuvers to keep you in power, to get the light off of you and onto something else. And so, it's like there's always that shell game that's being played by politicians of watch what I think I want you to see happening, because over here is some bad stuff I don't want you to see. And so whether he actually started the fire or continued them going, Rome is burning. He is getting blamed for it. Rome is on its demise because it has really moved toward a very much like America's government, real top heavy in government, lots of money flowing to the government, little work being done among the people, and there's a kind of an uprising in Rome as well. You're seeing the downfall from within of Rome, and so it's burning. They're beginning to blame Nero. Nero feels the heat. He decides he's going to toss it to the Christians and blame them and say that, man, those are the ones. I mean, they're trying to overthrow the government. It's them. They must have set this thing on fire. They hide out in the catacombs and they eat. When it's because they celebrate the Lord's Supper. He says they're cannibals. They eat each other, and anyway, just all kind of trash. That's when the Christian. And not only them, but the Jews. So that's going on among the Christians, and then the Jews are beginning to revolt. You remember James and John were sons of thunder. They were zealots. There was a movement, even in Jesus' day, of taking on Rome, of just rebelling, of just going crazy with that, which is a weird thought because we're talking about Rome was the mightiest empire in the world at that time. But the uprisings are getting worse, which is ultimately going to lead to Jerusalem being destroyed. But right now we're in the middle of that. And so all of that is taking place. So Paul seems to have been arrested in Corinth on his way to Nicopolis. That's what Clement and Eusebius, one of the historians, also kind of relays a little bit. But at any rate, Paul somehow is arrested, ends up in Rome. Now, he's alone in Rome, and this is about 65 to 67 AD. He's alone, and he's I think we talked about that in one of our earlier studies. He's in a little hole in the ground, a dungeon filled with just sewage and everything else, and it's just you kind of down a ladder, and there you are. So he's sitting in this nasty environment, and he writes 1st and 2nd Timothy, and he writes Titus from this. Now, this is not a house arrest. This is a nasty place where he can see visitors, but it's a terrible place. When he writes to Timothy, he says Onesiphorus had a hard time finding him. So Onesiphorus is wandering the street. Hey, where's Paul? I'm looking for Paul. Hey, there he is in that hole, right? And so that's where he is. Now, Luke is still with him at that point. Doesn't mean he's in the hole with him, but Luke is still in town. And Paul asked Timothy to join him. He says, I want you to pick up John Mark because he's valuable to me in ministry. Remember, that's the one that Paul wouldn't let go on his journeys. At the end of his life, he's like, man, that guy's rock solid. And that's because of two people, Barnabas and Peter. Paul had given up on him, but those two didn't. And they made a mature man out of him. And so Paul is now saying, hey, bring John Mark to me, for he's valuable to me in ministry. Now, John Mark will go on to write the Gospel of Mark, and those really are the memoirs of Peter that he wrote, and that's how we got that gospel account. So then he says in that same letter, hey, Timothy, when you come, grab my coat and my books that I left because it's getting nasty around here. Now, so that's where we go. Now he has his first trial because he's writing to Timothy in 2 Timothy 4:16, and he says, hey, here at my first offense, no one was here. So we know he's already had a preliminary hearing, or it may have been the hearing, and his life may be over. So this is what happens next, and with this we'll leave this story. Eusebius, who wrote in the 4th century ecclesiastical history, pretty exhaustive study of just kind of a deal of what took place from the church up until his time, says that Paul and Peter preached in Rome. Now, whether they did that early on, somewhere in the middle of his freedom, or wherever they did it, Paul and Peter were contemporaries who preached together in the midst of all of this terrible destruction going on in Rome and the Jewish revolt. And so you've got the Christians are hated and the Jews are hated, and Rome's in upheaval. Nero's gone crazy. He's just looking to shed the light off of him. And Nero was so wicked that he would take the Christians and he would dip them in, have them doused in like tar and put on poles lit so that he could light his pathway as he walked from one of his places to the next. And so he was a brutal, evil man. It was him that conspired to do, all sorts of putting Christians to death in brutal ways. And so Paul and Peter most likely died at the similar season of this. Paul was beheaded and gave his life to the sword, and Peter was crucified. And Peter, remember, appealed and said, "Can I be crucified upside down? I'm not worthy of being crucified in the same way as my Lord." And so both of them lost their life. And when Eusebius writes, he says that their names, you can go to the cemetery there in Rome now and still see their names in that cemetery. And so that's where we leave it, to understand Paul, and up to the very end, he is just giving orders and loving people and ministering the gospel of Christ. And it's been a great study for me. I've really enjoyed this. I hope you have. Monday, Lord willing, we're going to launch into the book of Colossians, and we're going to just dredge along in that and enjoy what we find. So until then, man, have a great weekend. Lord bless you greatly, and I look forward to seeing you Monday, if that be His will.